Welcome to episode 255 of Destination Linux. Whether you're brand new to open source or a guru of sudo, this is the podcast for you. My name is Michael.
I'm Jill.
And I'm Ryan.
Also, just off camera with us, hyped directly in from Jitsi, is our glorious community of fact-checking, ego-busting patrons. And on this week's episode of Destination Linux, we have a really special guest, an interview with the creator of Lutris, Mathieu Comandon. Then we're going to discuss KDE appealing to a wider audience. And plus, we have our tips and tricks and software picks, all this and so much more coming up right now on Destination Linux. This week in our community feedback, we head to our discourse forums where I brought up a topic related to documentation. I asked the community which distro has the best documentation. And of course, there's going to be people who will mention...
ArchWiki.
Yes,
oh,
that.
Period.
Yes.
Let's move on.
There were people, I knew that would happen. So I put a little bit of nuance on the question, which has the best technical documentation and which distro has the best user, like average user type of documentation, the getting started approach. Oh. So you can automatically take the Arch part out of the last section. What do you think is the best for the overall getting started thing? So if you want to give your opinion on that, we'll have that linked in the show notes. I don't know why I couldn't remember the words show notes. But if you want to, we'll have links in the show notes for that.
I think it's interesting to hear some of the responses in the community. I mean, people gave some suggestions out there of documentation they thought is well done. Fedora was one that was mentioned. People thought had user-friendly documentation. But the overall consensus is that documentation is one of the worst things about Linux when even going across. So even when you're saying these are the best, it's the best of a really bad situation in Linux. And I have to agree. I think, I've committed changes to the ArchWiki, which always get changed back, as Michael jokes. Actually does happen.
Because it happens.
Like you make a commitment to the ArchWiki to simplify it, and then they go back and they change it or
like,
take it out.
This is too simple. We got to fix that.
Too simple. I don't like this. So they have certain ways that they do their documentation. Arch has saved me in multiple distros, the wiki. It really has. Like whether I'm using Fedora or anything else, there are certain things that it goes through and discusses, or packages that you realize that you need to install to fix certain things.
Sure.
That ArchWiki has that does really well. So I think it's a good example of a very technical, like you said, documentation that's well organized, easy to search. It is not user-friendly, though. And that's a very key point to one of the problems that we're seeing as new people are coming into Linux. We're going to talk about gaming later with Lutris and things, is that the documentation or understanding terminal commands or cutting and pasting these weird magical incantations is not natural for most people that grew up with computers and grew up using, Windows 10. They're not used to those type of things. So with that, documentation becomes really important. Also, accessibility. I've also contributed to the accessibility documentation for Pop! OS. As an example, accessibility is generally missing in a lot of distros documentation. So this is a big problem as well that needs to be looked at and overcome. But the great thing about Linux is all of these problems can be solved with the community. And this is something that everybody can contribute towards. You don't have to be a programmer. You don't have to go learn, take, hours and hours of classes and things to learn. You just need to start helping write and fix documentation that already exists out there. It's a really easy and powerful way that you can contribute back to some of these projects that you love out there. But I think it's interesting that a lot of people in the community said, hey, this is one of the biggest problems Linux faces right now is the documentation.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the standouts in the Ubuntu-verse is actually Ubuntu Mate, especially for new users, because it boots with a welcome menu with tutorials on getting started and how to use the OS. And it has a link to access the forums and community and the software boutique. So I think Ubuntu Mate has nailed it.
Yeah, I think that's a great example of distribution having putting a lot of effort into the user side of the documentation. And I do think it is still true that like the overall ecosystem needs to do some work on documentation. But I love it when I see projects putting that effort in, because it's such an important piece that is kind of overlooked. It's kind of overlooked because you're not thinking about it in the terms of, well, you want to create the software and you want to make the software better. So you spending time for the documentation kind of takes away from that. And I've seen sometimes projects do that for that reason. But it is a very important thing because it makes it easier for people to get started when they see that there's a path that's explaining like the steps and things like that. But I do also want to say that yes, Ryan, the Arch Wiki is useful. It is great technical documentation. I'd also argue that Gentoo's documentation is very good too for the technical side. I found a lot of things in the Gentoo wiki that the Arch Wiki didn't have.
Whoa, they can't.
But there's a lot of great options that are, currently you could start to contribute to those to make them better. And I think that that's a great point that Jill said about the Ubuntu Mate. That's a great example that other distros should look at and say, like, how could they improve it, especially with the welcome app, making it easy to get to that stuff. I think every distro should have a welcome app.
Needs that.
And set up documentation really easy to get access.
You mentioned Ubuntu going in and making a big case to make some changes and update their documentation. This is so important, especially for Ubuntu. And I'll tell you why. There are so many people who use it. And when you're searching for an issue with Ubuntu, what you come across is, because so many people have used Ubuntu for so many years, is you come across, instead of documentation, you come across forums where people are posting answers. But now those forum answers are so old. They're from like 2009, 2006, and people don't look at the dates. They just search for something. Right. They pick the first result that comes in Google or DuckDuckGo or whatever they're using. And they go in there and they start pasting these commands that are no longer valid at all, or PPAs that don't exist or may not even be secure, because the documentation is not the first thing to come up. And that's because nobody uses the documentation because it's terrible generally. So it's very important for distros, not only from the standpoint of making sure that they're not answering unnecessary support questions all the time or getting hammered with tons of questions, because it's in the documentation, you can point them there. But also from a standpoint of people really having a terrible experience with their distro, because instead of documentation, they're going to old community forums that are taking the place of that documentation right now.
And I think it's very important to give credit where credit is due. Like, Ubuntu's had pretty bad documentation for a while because it's been out of date and they haven't put a lot of attention to it. But they did hire someone to go into and fix that documentation, which is good.
Yeah, especially since Ubuntu used to it used to have the best documentation, like going up to 10 years ago. It had one of the most robust forums for documentation. So it makes sense. They just need to give it a lot of love and bring it up to modern specs. But also I wanted to say, for technical, besides Arch, which I love for technical as well, I like Debian. I still go to the Debian forums for technical, and also OpenSUSE.
Yeah.
So those are my other two favorites.
Absolutely.
It's interesting that you brought up Ubuntu having some of the best documentation, and now, obviously there's some work needs to be done. There's a lot of work needs to be done on all distros, so this is definitely not picking on Ubuntu there.
Yes.
But it shows the importance of keeping this stuff evergreen, right? And that you can have fantastic documentation. Like the Arch Wiki could be the greatest thing ever today, but 4 years from now, if nobody's maintaining it, it becomes completely worthless. So that maintenance and staying involved in documentation is really important. I just want to highlight one more time that accessibility is one of the things I see missing in so many distro documentation. And if you do not have a separate accessibility section, well, you can go on to, for instance, Pop! OS has their stuff on Git. You can go look at the accessibility for documentation that I contributed to them, and you could take that and use it for other distros as well, because a lot of that accessibility stuff works in multiple distros, but each distro should have that as their own section.
Absolutely.
But this is why we love the community's engagement. Michael posted a question out there on the Discourse forum. You all responded. It got us all talking and thinking about different ways that documentation is kind of impacting Linux and how important it is. So we love hearing from you. And what we want you to do is get your official DLN mug, fill it with some coffee or bubbly, sit down at your nearest stool, or if you're an adult, you don't have a stool, so you can sit on your chair, and send us an email at comments@destinationlinux.org. And of course, we have our discourse forum, which was what we highlighted today. So if you want to join in community discussions, then join the DLN community forum by going to dlnforum.com. This episode of Destination Linux is brought to you by DigitalOcean. Now's the perfect time to dive into DigitalOcean. Their new app platform service helps you build modern cloud-native apps for way less money. With App Platform, you could build, deploy, and scale apps and static websites faster and easier than ever before using a simple, intuitive interface. Michael, I was messing around with some other cloud providers that will not be named, shall not be named, and their interface, when they talk about simple interface here with DigitalOcean, they're not kidding. Like, it is the most easy interface to navigate out of any of them out there. And when we talk about documentation, how about 5,000 cloud agnostic tutorials out there that actually tell you, hey, if it's out of date, it'll have big words across it. Don't use this. This one's out of date. They just keep it there. But they always have the new one linked right there as well. So you can go to the newest documentation and make sure you're deploying the right things and making the right changes, which is just one of the many reasons I absolutely adore DigitalOcean. You simply point App Platform to your GitHub or GitLab repository, let it do all the heavy lifting, whether using Node.js, Python, Go, PHP, Ruby, static sites, Docker, and container images, which I've been messing with a lot lately. Absolutely love messing with container images. One-click installs in DigitalOcean. It's amazing. All of this built on top of DigitalOcean Kubernetes, providing a smoother migration path so you can control your infrastructure setup. As a Destination Linux listener and member of the DLN community, they're going to give you $100 to check out this interface, to check out the 5,000 cloud agnostic tutorials, to check out all of this amazing stuff that they're doing at DigitalOcean. You're going to get a $100 credit to play with by going to do.co/DLN. Go get your $100 credit right now. And we want to thank DigitalOcean for sponsoring this episode of Destination Linux.
This week, we are excited to welcome Mathieu Comandon, the founder of Lutris, to the Destination Linux podcast. But before we get started, it's a special day for Mathieu. It is his birthday, so we were so happy to have him join us for it, celebrate it on the show. Happy birthday, Mathieu.
Happy birthday, man.
Aw, happy birthday, my dear friend.
We should have got a cake, Michael. Like,
we should.
I mean, that I could eat and not share it with anybody because we're all far away.
Well, as they
from
say,
each
the
other,
cake is a
but
lie,
still.
so maybe
Hey,
not.
yeah, exactly. Matthew knows that very well.
Yeah. I'm waiting for it.
Mathieu, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Happy to be here.
So I first started using Linux in the late 1990s, and you predate me a bit in terms of using Linux, and I would love to know more about your journey leading up to the creation of Lutris. So how did you get started with using Linux?
Before I was on PC, I was using an Amiga 500. So I was never like a big fan of Microsoft operating systems. Whether it was MS-DOS or Windows 3.11, or it didn't have like the multimedia capabilities of what the Amiga could do, and I don't know, it didn't feel like something I wanted to use. So the first time I heard about Linux, it caught my interest because I was looking for anything that wouldn't be Windows, basically, because at the time, so in 95, Amiga was pretty much dead. Commodore was no longer existed. They wanted to sell the brand, like the Amiga brand, to other companies that didn't work so well. And the magazines at the time, the Amiga magazines, they would start talking about other operating systems. So you would have like BIOS and of course Linux. So a bit later, I got this Linux books, my first Linux book from a Amiga retailer. And it came with 2 Slackware CDs.
Slackware again.
Woohoo!
It's always Slackware. Slackware got so many people into Linux. It's crazy. We always hear
Yeah.
Yeah, and at that time, I didn't even know it was called Slackware. It was just written Linux on the cover of the book. It wasn't written Slackware at anywhere. Like I didn't know what the distribution was. So for me, it was just Linux that I was installing. But yeah, that was like the first experience, and I didn't use it full time. I did like the usual, like battling the X386 and like the CRT refresh rates, and
Yeah.
all of
Have to
this.
blow up your monitor.
Managed to run Doom. managed to run like some things like FVWM95 or like other like simple window manager. But yeah, that was like simple experimentation, and I mostly used Windows at the time. But then you would have those magazines that would have live CDs in them, and that would keep me coming back to Linux.
Interesting. So you mentioned the fact that you didn't like Windows 3.11 and DOS, but then when you found the Slackware CD that you didn't know was Slackware, but just had Linux on it, and you installed it, what was it about Linux that you did like in comparison to Windows 3.11 or DOS at the time? What was it that kept your attention?
I wouldn't say that there was something that caught my attention at the time. I just started playing with it. I've never used like Windows 3.
Oh, you missed out.
Except maybe at school or for...
Well,
No,
I
you
don't
didn't.
think I've missed out at all. I mean, I even to this day,
yeah.
but yeah, the first experience with the PC was Windows 95, and I didn't I wasn't a fan of it, but I mean that was where the games were. That was like how I first started using a PC, and I would still like experiment with Linux, but the fact that it was so rough and so new, and it didn't have all the software that Windows had at the time. Like it was really a whole universe different bit for what we have now. Like we have all the software now on Linux, but at the time it was really like only the Unix utilities and small window managers and
All business all the time back then.
Yeah, and I only had like one computer and a small hard drive, so it would have like Windows most of the time, and Linux would be like on live CDs, and once every few months I would try these new live CDs and find out about GNOME or find out about KDE and all of stuff. So yeah, that was like really the cool stuff. I was discovering all the software, and when I made the jump to being a full-time Linux user, then I didn't feel like so unfamiliar.
Right. So you kind of dabbled with the two. You were using Windows 95 for gaming, and gaming became a big deal in your life because it's one of the things we know you for. So I want to kind of talk about that a little bit. You founded Lutris in 2009. So take us back to 2009. What made you decide to start working on Lutris? And did you plan for Lutris to become this giant thing that it is today?
And I never expected like gaming on Linux to become as good as it is today. I mean, this is pretty much like the really top where, I mean, almost the top where I wish we went. So that's very good. But back then, like in 2009, I was already using Ubuntu I had been using Ubuntu for 3 years. And that was when I made the full switch to Linux, when I erased Windows from my drive and everything. So I had been a full-time Linux user for 3 years, and running games to work, that wasn't easy. It involved like a lot of tutorials that weren't like always good quality. They sometimes they were made for an old distribution or an old version of a game or whatever. I mean, it wasn't always easy to get something running. There were a lot of emulators or game engines that were only available as source. So you had to jump through all those hoops to get them compiled. It was getting games to run took so much time that you would spend all this time like configuring like the game instead of playing the game. So I wanted to have something that was like, okay, I want just to click a few buttons and be able to play the game. So that's what started me working on Lutris. And back then, like in 2009, like no one cared about gaming on Linux. Like that was just before Humble Indie Bundle happened. So it had been like a few years since like any big title shipped to Linux natively. Yeah, I mean we had like so few games, so I was like, okay, since no one cares about Linux, then we might as well try to improve the wine situation and get all the open source engines that we can find and kind of put them together and assemble them and into some single platform that's easy to use. So that was like the beginning of Lutris, and at the time there was Play on Linux that already existed and was already quite popular. but the way it was written, like the architecture of the project, I wasn't so big fan of it. It was like a mixture of Python and Bash, and I wanted something that was just Python. Also at the time, Canonical was pushing a lot for like Python development and also GTK development. So they were giving our courses on RRC and all that kind of stuff. I mean, that's something I miss a lot. And yeah, so they were providing this framework as well called Quickly, which made it possible to develop some GTK apps with Python and really easily ship them like on Launchpad and all this stuff. So that made the process easier for the creation of Lutris.
That's really interesting. I wanted to ask you really quick about what you said, because you talked about the easy entrance of having be able to just click a button and have the game, because it was previously very difficult. And I think it's just fascinating that you decided I want this to exist so much that I'm willing to build something to make that happen for other people as well. And you were talking about how there wasn't really gaming at the time. People didn't care. There was this is actually kind of an interesting point, because at that period, while I would consider myself a gamer, and before I switched to Linux, I would consider myself a gamer, I decided that I wanted to switch so much that I was okay with no gaming. That was how it was at the time, because you really could only play like 10 to 20 games max. And now we're at a period where almost everything you want to play is available, and Lutris makes it so easy to do that. So first, thank you for making it and going through that process.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm so glad it annoyed you so that you fixed it for all of us.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And, Lutris really has changed the landscape for gaming on Linux.
Oh my gosh.
For not just playing new games, but for the emulated classics. I mean, gaming on Linux wouldn't be where it is today if it wasn't for Lutris. And then, Valve came along and had their Linux initiative. So
I think in a way you actually kind of inspired Valve to even get involved, because prior to Lutris, there wasn't like there was low-key software years earlier, and then all of a sudden there was nothing for a few years.
Yeah, and also like the way, well, I'll mention it later, but the way the Proton works is very, very similar to how we've been using Lutris. It's like a lot of similarities between Proton and but I'll expand on that later on. But yeah, there's little doubt that Valve kind of took at least some ideas from Lutris to make Steam Play and Proton and all that stuff. Yes.
Yeah, Matthew, I was going to make a point. I remember when No Man's Sky came out, and it ran on Wine, but it wasn't that great, and it wasn't really smooth. And Matthew actually made tweaks in Lutris and Wine to optimize it to better run on Linux, making it a lot cleaner and a higher frames per second. And it made me so happy, because
Lutris has done this with a dozen
so many
games,
yeah.
And it made such a difference with me, because when I was doing my Linux journey and I'm trying to show people, hey, this is a good platform, you can game on it and all this stuff. And I remember before I learned about Lutris, sitting there trying to get Doom 2016 to run. And oh my gosh, trying to find the right Wine engine and trying to install the missing drivers and figure out the error messages, or just installing Lutris and installing Doom and playing. Very big difference between those two and experiences. And Lutris just made things so much smoother across the board, for sure.
Well, what's awesome is, because I'm a close friend with Matthew, what's really cool is when there's games that weren't working on Linux in Wine or Proton, I could ask Matthew to get them to work for me on Lutris.
The inside scoop.
Yeah.
See, Michael, this works out for us because we're good friends with Jill, who's good friends with Matthew, and now we can get our stuff sent through Jill, Yeah. Keep Matthew busy.
Yeah, well, I don't patch Wine a lot. I mean, I mostly ask people to patch Wine for me. So it will probably end up going to Glorious Eggwell, who does also Proton. Or, yeah, I mean, there's like a lot of people who work on Wine, but there's like a Wine TKG as well. That's a popular one. I mean, there's everything that we can find that's like a patch for wine, we'll try to integrate into our builds. So that's why the compatibility is higher than vanilla wine.
Yeah, that's awesome.
But yeah, I don't personally do the patching of wine. Yeah.
Yeah, and speaking of that, of wine and Proton, going back a little further, can you explain, Matthew, how Lutris and its runner system works?
Sure. So I was mentioning that the goal is to leverage every existing software that can run games and make them like easy to use. So that was like the runners are a collection of software that we build and ship as part of the Lutris projects. So like the most popular one is going to be wine. With our patches and everything. But we also have a lot of emulators like Dolphin, MAME, like as many emulators as we can ship. And also a lot of game engines like ScumVM, GZ, Doom, anything that can run several games and we try to ship. And then like from these runners, they get downloaded by the Lutris clients. From the Lutris client, then the user can add their game libraries. So it can be GOG, Humble Bundle, Steam. So any game source they add to the clients. And from the client, they can install the games, then use the runners to launch the games. So yeah, it's like several like pieces that are put together like through the clients. There's also something that's quite transparent from the user's perspective, but the games get installed with a script that can be edited and modified from the website. So it's completely open to anyone. In a lot of cases, it's not useful to have one. Lutris can manage to install like a GOG game or a Steam game by itself without a script. But if there's like anything special going on, like during the game setup, then someone can go and make a script. So that's useful for, say, a game where the main game, like the base one, doesn't work anymore because it's like too old or something. But there's a mod to get the game running. So I was like, for example, I was trying to play Kingpin: Life of Crime, like an old FPS that was for Windows and for Linux, to be fair. So and I was trying to get it running, and it would always crash. But there's an up-to-date community mod for it, and thanks to those install scripts, it's very easy to download the mod, set it up in place of the game executable. So that's like the sort of thing that's Lutris can do to make the life of gamers easier.
And we kind of seen how impactful this can be, where Lutris takes care of some of that stuff on the back end, or makes the instructions very clear. If there's anything in additional with Lutris you have to do to get a game running, like with this Linus videos and things where people see these terminal commands and they panic. So to some of us veterans, getting a game running and running some of these commands and doing some of these configs, maybe it's not a big deal to us. But to somebody who's not familiar with Linux, getting in there and seeing, oh, you got to go into this config file and make all these tweaks and then run these commands and then add this stuff in and then choose this one. It's just way too confusing. And that's where Lutris made such a big difference in my mind in simplifying getting those type of things running so you could just play the game, which is what we all want to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Lutris makes it so easy to contribute as well. Like for those who don't know, I have contributed to Lutris, sort of. And this is the thing that makes me really happy about the way that Lutris works and the community works, because my contribution has been completely rewritten and made way better than what I did. So, because I added a game that was using an emulator, and I did like I added the script to make it run and set up the emulator and all that stuff. And then I went back 6 months later to check to see if there was any updates to see if there's anything that needed to be changed. And then I looked at it so the only thing that's still here is the screenshots that I posted. That's fine, because this is way better approach. So that's one of the things I love about Lutris as well.
They'll take your crap code and fix it?
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Michael, what game was it?
GoldenEye for the N64.
Ah.
Yeah. This was years ago, but you were talking about Proton earlier, and you were talking about the differences, like how they're similar, and I was wondering if you can go more into detail about that, and also how has Proton itself affected Lutris? Like, has it helped it, maybe hindered it? What is the situation between the differences between how Lutris works and in Proton?
So it's really similar on the hood, because Proton is mostly a collection of software that's involving a patch version of Wine, also DXVK, VKD3D, and F Audio. So Proton is like a package with all of this, and all of this software is something we've shipped in Lutris before Proton was a thing. We can say that Lutris was Proton before Proton, and in some way we had the Steam integration, which we'll get rid of like soon, but we could like run Steam in Wine. So that was like the very first iteration of Proton, like the very first prototype, let's say. But yeah, that means that's the two are very close. So there's like not really a big difference, except that Proton uses also containers now, which is like the reason why we had to stop supporting Proton in Lutris itself. So you have to use our Wine builds instead of Proton, which are really close. But Proton uses Pressure Vessel, which is based on Flatpak. And whereas we use something that's closer to the old Steam runtime. Actually, it was at some point it was based on the old Steam runtime, and then we evolved onto Ubuntu Bionic. But it's still the same system where we preload a set of libraries instead of having like real containers. So at some point, I would like to also use Pressure Vessel to sort of unify all of this and just make Proton compatible with Lutris again. But yeah, for now it's basically the same thing. So it's just that Proton runs Steam games, Lutris runs like non-Steam games, and that's the big difference. So yeah, but the important thing is that Proton exists, that Valve has put a lot of work into not only Proton but also Mesa, Xorg, like all those Linux projects. And without this work, we wouldn't be where we are today. So we are like really grateful for what they've done, and also the fact that they've kept everything open source. That means that's like everyone wanted to work and go onto the same like Linux gaming train, then we could improve this situation. And it was like everyone involved could help. And they could have made like everything proprietary and not give back to the community, but they have not done that. They kept everything open source. So yeah, really, we're grateful for that.
Yeah, that's an awesome point. I mean, the fact that Valve worked on Proton with Codeweavers to make it an open source project so that it could be beneficial to everyone is fantastic. But the work they're doing on the other stuff is really cool. And I think it's a great point that you mentioned how that Lutris is great for the games that are not in Steam.
And you can integrate, with Lutris, you can integrate GOG and all of these things into one. So it becomes a manager of all of your games as well, which is really nice. I love that fact. You mentioned, though, that Proton's doing something in these containers and you guys are using kind of the original engines and you plan to switch to their container system that they're using for Proton. Did I hear that correctly?
Yeah, I mean, I've experimented a little bit with Pressure Vessel, and if we can manage it, then yes, I would like to switch to this system. If it's worth it, I mean, I don't see it very complicated. If it's worth doing, then yeah, I would like to be it like the way of we go onward, because our current runtime system has its limitation. I mean, there's a reason also that Valve has stopped using it and has switched to this Pressure Vessel system. Yeah, it's still no real plans. It's just that I've experimented with Pressure Vessel. I've started like seeing if I could run things in it, and I could. So from there, I don't know. I'll see what happens. Like once the Steam Deck is released, maybe I'll have more time to experiment on that front. It's not one of the priorities of the project, but it's still something that I would like to work on.
Yeah. So Matthew, on the Lutris website, you mentioned a focus on video game preservation. For those who aren't aware, what is video game preservation and why is it such an important focus for Lutris? I mean, I know, but we got to let our audience know.
Yeah, so for a lot of people, Lutris is a way to run Windows games, which wasn't the goal originally. So I wanted to make this this preservation aspect more prevalent, because that was like the original goal of the project, was really to be able to run any game, not only Windows games, but really any game that's you might have played during the course of your life. Then I wanted it to be playable using Lutris. And otherwise, if it was only for Windows games, I would have just started contributing to Play on Linux, which was a solution back then. But yeah, that's only one of the platforms that I want to support. And before, because the computing platforms, they move so fast and they change so often, then we have games that are like not that old, that are not now considered retro. So maybe the goal of that is to keep your games longer on your machine, so they don't age that fast. So by using any means we have, like mods or open source engines or anything we can find, then we make the games last longer. That way you don't have to have only a few selection of games on your machine, but you can keep all your game collection that you've had throughout your life on this machine using Lutris. So it's not only like PC games, but also your PlayStation games, also your Super Nintendo games. Also, what I would like to do is make people more comfortable with the concept of emulation, because even if it's games that people have bought, then they're kind of like risky to get like ROMs off the internet and stuff. But I mean, they have paid for the game. They were here when the game companies have released the game, and they were here to support the company. So I believe that they have the right to run the game today. Like the people who have bought the game at some point should still have the right to play the game today,
Absolutely.
Even if you have to download a copy of the internet or something. Yeah.
I mean, I think that's a very important piece, because like if you could see in the background, I have some games consoles and some specific games that from old generations of stuff that like you really can't practically play right now, because I'd have to get an adapter to be able to connect the consoles to my existing TVs or monitors, because they don't support the connectors anymore. And having the preservation aspect of, involving emulators is very important to me, because there are certain games, like I was talking about with GoldenEye N64, that wouldn't be accessible to me at all right now. And I think it's very important, because I still love that game.
Yeah, you had memories that you built with that game. I had a game like that. I think it was called Laser Squad. And it was a really old game that me and my cousin spent a summer playing. And I remember somebody had preserved it on the internet, which I was so thankful for, because I got to look at how terrible the game was. But back then it looked amazing to me. But how terrible it looks to me today, but still have fun and kind of relive that, because this is art and it's a part of our lives. And preserving these games and keeping them around is just as important as preserving any other type of art out there. And that's why I think the work that Lutris is doing and others that are out there trying to preserve these games, making sure you can run them, is such an important thing, because otherwise they're going to be lost. I mean, we might be able to find them in Jill's museum on a floppy or something like that, but otherwise they'd be gone, So talking about consoles out there, the Steam Deck has a lot of Linux users really excited for the future of gaming, and that this is going to bring a lot of attention to gaming on Linux, and with that, of course, a lot more users potentially as well. Are there plans to make sure there's compatibility with Lutris, or what are your thoughts overall on this device?
So I'm very excited as well for the Steam Deck. The device itself has a desktop mode like the old SteamOS had as well. So I'm not too worried about the regular version of Lutris running on it. But that said, it's like not the easiest way to control it. So the plan is to have a full screen UI for the Steam Deck, but not only the Steam Deck, also like for TVs or any device. This is something plans we had before the Steam Deck was announced. We wanted to have some kind of console-like interface that you can get a controller and use it on a big screen. So yeah, now is like the perfect time to start working on that, because the Steam Deck is shipping soon. So I would like to have something before before the Steam Deck is available. There were like many options to start building a UI for the Steam Deck, and the one that made the most sense was Godot. It's like an open source project, so that was a very important point for me. And also it can do like full screen, it can do like control supports, and it seems like very easy to get familiar with. It uses like a Godot script, which is very similar to Python. It shouldn't be too hard porting some of the code over to Godot. So it's not going to be a full port. I'm not going to port the full UI. I mean, at least yet, I don't think so. At least there going to be a front end in Godot. Like a part of the backend will be in Python still. So yeah, that's kind of the plan for the Steam Deck. Meanwhile, I built a machine that is roughly equivalent to the specs of the Steam Deck, and that's what I'm going to use before the device ships. This is something with the Ryzen 5600G, so no GPU, and it runs like every game I've thrown at it. It runs the game great. So even like Doom Eternal or Cyberpunk. All those games,
nice.
they run. I mean, not at high frame rates. So sometimes it's like 30 FPS, but it still runs like in any case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's amazing what the integrated graphics on Horizon can actually run these days. If you've not had a chance to play with them, it blew me away. I had a little mini PC that I put one of those chips in, and every game I threw at it, you could play in a comfortable frame rate. Now you're going to get 150 frames per second on a AAA game, but you're going to have a playable 30 frames per second, which on a Steam Deck is what they're really shooting for there on a portable kind of environment.
Yep.
And I love that you took the initiative to go out there and build a machine that's going to mimic like the Steam Deck, so you can start getting Lutris and everything geared towards that. I think that's so awesome and shows just how much you care about this project.
Yeah, so I built like I call them consoles now because they are like, I treat them like game consoles. They are computers that just run games. And I have like my first Lutris console. I care so much about that I don't want to mess with it. It's like a production device. So now it has my games on it, and I don't want to mess with it. So I bought this other machine that runs Manjaro KDE, like Valve said we should be running for like Steam Deck, or it should be like the closest things to SteamOS that we'll get. I can do anything on it. I can experiment and do really treat it as a development device instead of having like my production console that I can not mess with.
I think this is really awesome that especially with the idea of having them separate, so you have a specific device for the development thing. But I got to know, what is the distro that runs the Lutris console that you made?
So it's Pop OS because that's the distro I use like on most of my machines, and it's something that works for me.
Nice.
The other one runs Manjaro KDE, so I'd say that they both run equally well. One is running GNOME and the other KDE. I mean, it doesn't make that much of a difference.
See, Michael, it doesn't make much of a difference.
I don't know, maybe.
For him to build his own computer for his... Yeah, okay, sure. But like, that's a broad statement, Ryan.
Yeah, KDE and GNOME, no difference. You don't need it.
Yeah.
But there are some people in our audience... I can't see, I don't understand why, but there are some people in our audience that don't care about gaming that much. And I do think that gaming is very important, and obviously we do, as everybody here does. Do you think the growing gaming community on Linux is an important factor for the growth of Linux market share in general? And if so, why?
And I've always considered games to be like the most advanced thing that a machine can do. I mean, it pushes like all the limits of a machine. It has to do like real-time graphics. It has to do audio. It has to treat all the inputs of the machine like really fast and be as low latency as possible. And sometimes in like a really heavy networked environment, like we have like hundreds of players at the same time. So this like really pushes like the machine to its full extent. So if you can run games, then you can basically do everything else. So if we got that covered, then the rest is like almost easy, like the heavy graphical applications, and then that's. I mean, we already see that. We already have like really good audio software, really good like 3D software. We just have like a new Blender release. I mean, that's really good stuff that we're seeing on Linux. And it's like the improvements we see in the video games, they will also affect the other software. So if we get improvements in like, say, kernel responsiveness for video games, that increases responsiveness for like the whole desktop and the other apps as well. So yeah, I mean, I think this is like an important part of, and even like just market share, it will attract users. So it will make publishers more susceptible to write their software for Linux, like non-games even.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've seen some claims out there. You know, we see comments and stuff sometimes on our videos when we talk about gaming. Individuals don't care about gaming, and it's cool not to care about gaming. I mean, if it's not for you, it's not for you. But I've also seen people act like it's not a serious thing or that important, or that it's for people who are kids or younger and things. And there are so many people I've run into in the gaming world who are from the professional world of lawyers and doctors and everything. Gaming's not just a young person thing anymore, of all age groups and all groups really entirely. And even a lot of famous people now who are well-known billionaires. So if you're like, well, games are a waste of time and nobody who's successful plays games, you got people like Elon Musk and Larry Page and Steven Spielberg and Richard Branson, who are all known gamers out there that love playing games and spend their time games, and also very successful in their own worlds of things that they do. But also I point people to the fact of how big the gaming industry is. I've mentioned this before, but I think it's a really important statistic that because it keeps growing. The last time we talked about the gaming industry and how much it's worth, it was that, and it really surprised a lot of people when I said this, is that it's actually bigger than the music industry and the movie industry combined. So as much money as music and all the movies and blockbusters out there, which nobody looks at a movie, even though you're just sitting there doing nothing, considers it a waste of time, but somehow consider games a waste of time. It's bigger. Gaming is way bigger, but actually gaming is 4 times bigger in revenue than movies now in 2020. It hit $159 billion, which is 4 times the size of the movie industry. And it's 3 times the size of the music industry, which is only worth $57 billion of 2020. So if you look at this, gaming on Linux, like you said, yes, it pushes the machine. It uses every ounce of power that a machine can, and it pushes innovation because of that. Innovation that gets used to make movies, innovation that gets used to make animations, for rendering, for all this other stuff that people, 3D modeling, all these other industries that aren't gaming actually benefit from what's happening in gaming and what the gaming industry is pushing. So I guess I say that to say gaming is very important, even if it's not something somebody who's listening particularly enjoys. The importance of the industry and the importance of getting it on Linux cannot be understated in my mind.
There's stuff like Unreal Engine 5 that's not started. People haven't started using it in games, but it's used like in architecture. It's used like in engineering, in movies. So yeah, it's like it was a game engine at the start. And now it has like all these applications that are outside of games because the software is so powerful.
Yeah.
A lot of my animation students, I'm teaching them animation, but also on game engines, on Unity and Unreal because of that reason, because even the television and film industry is moving to that. So,
very cool. Also, for those who have a overlap between gaming enthusiast and a movie enthusiast, also be sure to put F in the comments for a RIP Blockbuster, just to let them know.
We miss Blockbuster. Yeah, man, let's bring Blockbuster.
You said Blockbusters like, oh, Blockbuster.
Oh, man, I miss going there hunting for a movie and it not being in stock. I hate this digital world where I can watch whatever I want, whenever I want.
Well, I mean, we could go into details, but we could probably leave this to another conversation.
Yeah, we'll do that in a Patreon after show. But my next question actually comes from the community here, which is they want to know what your favorite game is.
Woohoo, Matthew.
And no pressure to pick a favorite game of all games ever.
I mean, I don't have just one. I'd say that I like a lot of the Metroidvania styles, like Super Metroid, like that's one of my favorite ones. But in the same style, I liked Bloodstained a lot. that came out recently, and also like the Dooms a lot, like the new Doom, like Doom Eternal. I like the Darksiders series as well. Good. Like the three Darksiders, like they were really great. Half-Life, a lot of Quake as well, like Quake 3, Quake Champions, Unreal, like all the Unreal tournaments, like a lot of the old school FPS and a lot of the Metroidvanias as well. I'd say that those are the favorites.
Yeah, Matthew. So many in our community, like to help open source projects that they love. What kind of help is Lutris looking for right now?
We're going to have a lot of evolutions in the projects in the following month, so it's going to be very fast-paced. I don't know if anyone will be able to join like the project at that stage, but still, I mean, we're still always looking for people like who can do like project management. That's a big thing. Like people who can sort through GitHub issues and close them, like response to them, assign them a milestone and all of that stuff. That would be really useful. People who can code with GTK. I've coded with GTK for 10 years. That doesn't mean I have no idea what I'm doing. So if we had someone who had a clue about GTK, that would be really nice. People who can do like web design, front-end development, like JavaScript stuff, that would be really cool. I'm working full-time on Lutris now that I've finished my contracts that I had with Yahoo. So now it's going to be Lutris for until March, I think, next year, until the Linux Expo in Pasadena Scale. And so, yeah, if you want to help the project, start with coming on our Discord. Just say what you can do. Like tell us like your skills, what you would like to do. I mean, we're always looking for people.
No, that's fantastic. So it sounds like you guys could use help in many different areas, from project management, web design, actual coding and things, GTKs, but anybody has some skill sets, they can go to Lutris Discord and hopefully be able to jump in there and help you guys out, which it's such a good project and a great learning opportunity as well. I hope a lot of people in our community take advantage of that. So to kind of leave it off, what are some exciting things coming to Lutris that we can look forward to that you can tell us about today?
So I've talked about the full screen UI with Godot, but there's also a lot more that is planned for the next few months. A lot of the features that we've planned from the start we should have them like coming soon, like the Origin integration with Ubisoft, with Battle.net, nice. itch.io as well. So all of those stores would have their full integration into the Lutris client. So it would be like a Humble Bundle or a GOG right now in the Lutris clients. Probably some kind of save game in sync, some cloud sync for games that don't have one, or like GOG games as well, because they currently rely on GOG Galaxy, but we don't have that on Linux, so I'll handle that with Lutris. Or game save for emulators as well. There's going to be like a lot of changes on the website to make it simpler to contribute installers and scripts, to unclog like the moderation queue, because there's like a lot of stuff that we haven't processed yet. I mean, there's going to be a lot that's coming in the next few months.
Very nice. Very exciting.
That's awesome. I'm looking forward to all these things that you've talked about, and I'm so looking forward to trying out Lutris on the Steam Deck. That's going to be fantastic too. And Mathieu, thank you so much for bringing Lutris to the Linux community. And we've had many people in our community tell us that they've tried to get some games working on Linux to almost give up right until they tried Lutris, and then it just helped them with relative ease. So it is very important, and we know that our community is a big fans of Lutris. And gaming on Linux has never been better, thanks in no small part to the work you're doing and the team at Lutris. So Mathieu, thanks again for joining us on the show today, and we hope to have you back on the show to discuss all things Lutris in the future.
You're welcome.
Aw.
Awesome. You made it, Mathieu. You made it through the gauntlet of questions and survived.
Yeah, you did. Those were a lot.
This episode of Destination Linux is brought to you by Bitwarden. Get started right now with your free account at bitwarden.com/DLN. Bitwarden is an awesome piece of software. It is a password manager that allows you to have peace of mind knowing that your online accounts are secure. How does it do it? Well, Bitwarden provides you with tools to store all of your passwords in a secured vault, auto-generate those passwords for you, and even automatically fill in those passwords on login forms so you don't have to do any of this stuff. Plus, it also gives you access to your data across many different types of devices, like your web browser, mobile applications, desktop application, and even on the command line. And Bitwarden seals and encrypts your private data with end-to-end encryption before it ever leaves your devices locally on your devices, so you know you're the only person with access to your data. But if you do want to share your passwords, you can set up an organizational vault with your friends and families, or you can do it with business accounts and do an organizational way to share those passwords, because some people share those passwords in text messages. Don't do that. That's not a good idea. Absolutely check out Bitwarden so you can have a secure way to share passwords in between your friends, your family, or in a business. So go to bitwarden.com/DLN to get started. And did I mention you can start it for free? Well, you can, but I think you also want to check out their premium account, because for less than $1 per month, that's right, less than $1 per month gets you access to two-step login with YubiKey, U2F Duo, Vault Health Reports, 1 gigabyte of encrypted file storage, Bitwarden Authenticator for temporary one-time passwords, priority customer service, and so much more. So make the smart move like many in the community have and go to bitwarden.com/DLN to get started. And thanks again to Bitwarden for sponsoring Destination Linux.
So this week in the news, I wanted to talk about an article that was posted by Nate Graham, and I knew this would get Michael's attention because it has to do with KDE. And if you think I'm bad talking about Arch, just get Michael talking about KDE. Well, you'll see here in a second. Anyways, this article I thought was really interesting because it was a discussion about the users that KDE is targeting with its complexity. He provides some really interesting statistics and information in here to kind of back up what he was saying. Some of the studies that were done, for instance, independent studies, not done by KDE necessarily, but they found that out of 200,000 adults that were studied in this particular case, 25% of them could not use a computer at all. Now, as Linux geeks, this is hard for us to comprehend, but I've come across this many times. I remember when I was doing a tutoring business for some of the elderly and things, and I had some really funny things happen, but they were funny only because I grew up with computers and they never had them. Like I would say, take your mouse and touch this cursor, and they pick up the mouse and start putting it on the screen, because that's literally what I was saying, and they were following what I was saying. They've never used a computer in their life. They never needed to use a computer in their life. So the fact that 25% of adults can't use a computer at all is surprising, but not as surprising to me as it would have been had I not had that experience. Then the 14% could only do very basic tasks. So basically, if everything was all set up and logged in for them, they could, double click an icon and launch some things. And the end result of all of this, there was a bunch of other statistics, but it ends up being about 40% of adults in rich countries here have practically no computer skills at all. So then Nate takes this, I think, quite brilliantly and makes the argument that KDE needs to lower its complexity, not to go after the brand new users. They're not switching the fact that KDE, one of the beautiful things about it is its high customization capability, but rather making sure that kind of more advanced features are an option within all of these settings, but not the first thing the user is presented with. And he kind of makes a joke in there that he'll leave the brand new users to GNOME and Elementary, which those are perfect for, and they're not going after there, but more of kind of the intermediate, right? People who know what they want to get in, know how to use a computer basically, know how to get into stuff, but may not want to get into those advanced settings. They may avoid KDE altogether. And I know my first adventures into KDE, you could end up changing stuff. And I remember having to reach out to Michael, like, I changed something and there's this weird things on the screen and I don't know what they are. How do I change them back? Or how do I get rid of this thing on my screen? And Michael would tell me. So KDE can be overwhelming to somebody who's not utilized it before. And he ends this by basically saying, essentially, we need to fully embrace Plasma's model of simple by default, powerful when needed, all KDE software, not just Plasma. I thought this was really interesting, and I wanted to get your take. You're a huge fan, Michael, of KDE. What did you think in this? Were you worried like, oh my gosh, this is going to ruin one of the things I love about KDE, all the customization, or did you agree with what Nate was saying?
Well, I am a huge fan of KDE Plasma and KDE in general, as Ryan has stated, which is totally true. I am. So, and this topic is also very important for me. For those who don't know, my non-podcasters work stuff is as a designer, and part of that work is UX design. And UX design is something that I can't help but to think about when I'm interacting with software or systems or any of that stuff. So this is partly why I customize so much, because I want to make it as best as I feel like it can be. But also I think about what could be improved whenever I'm using, well, kind of anything. So KDE Plasma as my desktop environment of choice, it has been for also almost 8 years now. So with that much time, yeah, I have some thoughts of how KDE could be better. But before I get to that, there was a really cool thing about the blog post that Nate talks about Vampire the Masquerade as a breakdown of the different type of skill levels. And I thought that was really interesting because, as a side note, for those who watched a previous episode, we talked about LARPing as a thing. And I didn't think about it until I saw this blog post, but that was the game that we were LARPing with, was Vampire the Masquerade. So I thought that was kind of interesting as well. But the way it breaks down is that it has 0 to 5 dots, and 0 being, having no experience whatsoever, and then it goes up to a tier. And Nate's kind of talking about how the 1 point user is someone who's like a point and click user who just knows enough to do some basic stuff, and that's it. And how KDE needs to focus on that kind of tier. And I think it'd be good to have, a consideration for the 0 point user as well. But it also is kind of hard to do that because when you're talking about picking up the mouse and touching the mouse on the screen, that's kind of difficult to, have consideration for. But I still think maybe in some ways think about it. But I'm not going to go into like a pitch meeting or whatever about what changes I would make because I left my diagrams and whiteboards in my other pants. But what I will say is I'm very happy to see this blog post being made. I was very, very happy because to me, there's a phrase called default is king. Essentially meaning whatever you have set up by default is going to be what people are expecting the system to do.
Especially if those people are me, because I leave everything at default.
Yes,
especially for Ryan, yes. Which is his whole not changing anything is a little bit like, it irks me a little bit when I go to his house and he's like, here, try this. Like, but why did you change nothing? Anyway, so when I see these things, I think about like how KDE is already awesome, but it could be the ultimate desktop of all of Linux, in my opinion, if it were to address the pain points of these 1 point level users. So, what would I change? I guess like if I could snap my fingers and change only one thing, I think it would be simplifying the system settings. Like there's a lot of things that I would like to change, but I think the system settings being simplified is the most important. And I don't mean removing anything. I don't like not changing and like taking out stuff. I think that system settings is amazing and powerful and absolutely ideal for people like me to have so much control that we can customize whatever we want. But for the 1 point users, I think it can be overwhelming. So I'd split it up, where you would first go to the system settings. You'd have a simple set of settings, just the most basic things that are the most important for the average user to be able to control and change, and then have an advanced button. So when you click it shows, here's everything you can have now. And I think that would go a very long way to simplifying the process for the users who are getting started.
Yeah, there's another thing that's come up multiple times, Michael, with KDE, and I think it's a bigger issue. I know there's scripts and programs and stuff to fix it, but I know it's been a pain point for you as well, is if you distro hop or you change computers or you upgrade and you have all of these customizations that I don't have to worry about because I use everything default. But in your case, all these customizations that you've done and exporting and importing those settings in KDE is a pain. I think it still is quite a bit of pain because while it can be done, because I know there's going to be the comment, you can export it. It's like in files all over the place with KDE to get it all together and try to basically export your settings and then be able to import them into a new install of KDE.
Yes.
That's still a problem.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's I didn't put that on my list necessarily as like the top thing because if I had to pick one thing, I think just simplifying the entrance to the system settings is my thing that I would pick. But the second thing would probably be the importing and exporting of the settings. I think that would be amazing to have that. Now that you said that there is a way to do it, and it is kind of convoluted because of how it's really cool that all the files and configurations for KDE is stored inside of your home folder, but it's also in a bunch of different folders and a bunch of different files. So it's really hard to know what you changed and where they would be to save them. And there are some third-party tools to like consave to be able to export those settings and things like that. But if KDE were to have that, it would be a game changer to a lot of people. Now, I don't think this is necessarily a one-point user thing because I don't think a lot of people would have the need to change over, but I think it also could be, it could be a one-point user thing. For example, let's say a one-point user puts Plasma on their laptop and then they decide, I like this so much, I want to put it on another laptop or I want to put it on my desktop. And then to have that same experience, they would have to duplicate a lot of the workflow, and it just wouldn't be the easiest of things. And porting the settings from one computer to another would be a huge value for them. And also it'd be, a huge value to everybody who uses Plasma and wants to put it on multiple things. Like, for example, I realize like I can do it, but even then, I don't really want to, so it kind of holds me back from trying other distributions. It holds me back from moving it to other computers. Like my laptop is currently not running Plasma because of having to transition the workflow.
What is it running, Michael? Huh? I couldn't hear you. You kind of broke up there. What is it?
It's got GNOME on it.
Oh, really?
It's got
welcome. I'd like to say welcome to the GNOME family.
Okay, it's got Fedora GNOME. Yes, that's true. Well, now that you've called me out on it, it might be changing. Who knows?
Yeah, there you go.
But yeah, it's currently running GNOME on the laptop, and
That's cool.
It's a nice way of like. One of the cool things about GNOME is that the out of the box experience is rather nice, and you don't have to change a ton. There are things that I would change, of course, because I like customizing everything. But it is nice for people who don't want to customize, such as Ryan. I can see why he would use that stuff. But with all that said, I'm super excited to see what comes from this blog post for KDE because I think it's already fantastic. And by addressing the one-point users, I think this could make KDE Plasma the undisputed champion of the desktop.
I think you're not wrong there. I think it definitely could. Jill, what are your thoughts on this?
To me, this is this article is at the right moment. Because as we know, KDE is going to be the default for the Steam Deck. And that's going to be a lot of the first users' introduction to Linux. So this is very, very important. And this article to me, definitely answers the age-old question with Linux, just Linux in general. How far do we simplify the user experience to make it easier for new users? That's something we need to work on and make things easier for them, but have the power for us.
Absolutely.
What's interesting is you look at something like Windows, and there are 3 different system setting control panel options within Windows that you may, to this day, I will stumble upon randomly the wrong one that I don't, the control panel that I really meant the other control panel that has the more advanced things that I need to get into. So it's not like Windows has really done this well at all themselves. It's just people are used to it because they have to use it for school. They had to use it for work. And so they're used to kind of dealing with that nonsense or having a sysadmin have to deal with it for them. In KDE, there's so much customization and brilliance here. And I love the idea if they can somehow do that mixture that Windows even never got right, which is have that simple layer and then have the advanced layer, but not have like 8 layers to accomplish that, right? It's just one or the other, your simple or your advanced kind of view there. But ultimately, Jill, I think you made a brilliant point about the Steam Deck and the KDE, and this is a really important time for them to start making these changes. And I just love Nate's blog. If you haven't checked out Nate's blog,
amazing.
it's pointystick.com. And he always puts some really brilliant thoughts out there into the community and things. So just a huge shout out to him.
I think it's also great that he does the This Week in KDE, so he's paying attention to what's happening in KDE and letting people know about what's coming and that sort of stuff, which is fantastic because there's a lot of inner workings and a lot of gears that makes KDE work, and that even their applications are called KDE gears. I didn't do that on purpose, but anyway. So there's a lot of inner workings to make it all come together. And having Nate explain it to the people who are not able to watch everything as it happens is so valuable. And I think that it'd be something that a lot of projects should consider to do as well, because it makes it easier for people to kind of see what's happening and get excited for those things. Also, it makes it easier for me to put it on shows. That's, just a side note.
That's true. Yeah,
just a side note. But I think that the Steam Deck point is a great example of, people getting, introduced to KDE in a, upfront way. And even those people might be 0 point users or 1 point users, that kind of thing. And they're more likely going to be a large quantity of those kinds of users because it's a kind of an introduction to Linux in that sense. So I think this is a fantastic thing that KDE has put out there to talk about, because Plasma is wonderful. I love Plasma, but the defaults, they could be better. Even though I think that they are super powerful. And
that customization, though, is why Steam probably picked KDE, right? Because they're going to want to make their own UI. They're going to want to be able to move things where they want them to be to fit on this Steam Deck screen. And be able to manipulate in the ways. So it's customization is its greatest asset. But again, like everybody's been saying here, this is cool that they're considering making it even simpler as an introduction out there.
Yep. And also just to put it out there for those in KDE who are interested, as I mentioned, I'm a UX designer. If you'd like my input, I would love to be participating in that.
And you'll you'll be able to find Michael's email. He's the one who's sent those recommendations to you 1,000 times.
1,000 times, yes.
Look for one of those emails and reply back.
And also hundreds of comments. Absolutely. I've never stopped talking about Plasma as soon as I started using it. So you could probably find me, in places.
Yeah. Right.
Yes. And speaking of Michael LARPing.
Oh, wow. There's more about Michael? This is like a Michael episode.
So Michael has long dreamed of being a dinosaur. Yes,
of course
that's
I
have.
Really?
A dinosaur. He often can be seen on weekends, live action role playing or LARPing, dressed up as a raptor and the
really
searching for other dinosaur cosplayers.
Jill, this is fascinating. I never knew this. I've been friends with Michael for a long time. I didn't know he did this on the weekends.
Me neither.
Hid this from me, but I'm glad.
I didn't know it either. That's interesting.
He does it in his sleep without knowing it.
That's what it is. That's what it is.
So you've long dreamed of being a raptor, Michael.
Apparently. Apparently. A T-Rex, maybe.
So the good news is that this week's game will allow him to partake in his dino dreams in a more private setting, laughing out loud. So the game this week is called Raptor Territory. Yes, nice. Raptor Territory. It is an early access indie game that describes itself on Steam like this. Raptor Territory is a strategic PvP action game that allows you to take control of a Deinonychus and engage yourself in multiple game modes full of fun and excitement. Collaborate with other players to capture the world map and beware of your enemies surrounding you to become an obstacle in your quest.
Very nice. There you go, Michael. You can finally live your dreams out.
Wait, now I need this to connect it to like a motion control capture thing so I can do this. And then,
Look how good he is. You guys got to watch the video version of Destination Linux if you just listen to the podcast, because Michael's Raptor impersonation.
I think it's spot
very
on.
good.
Off the chain.
I'm impressed.
Yeah. Good job, Michael.
So what's really cool is Raptor Territory has 6 really fun game modes. One I've played is Rescue the Baby Deinonychus, who has been spawned into this spooky world. Carry it through, thrive, and survive. And it's also got lots of really cool team modes. And one of which is you can get up to 52 players divided into 4 teams. and be the undisputed conqueror of the nests by destroying the nests of the rival teams.
Oh, yeah.
Nice.
Multiplayer dinosaur LARPing. Awesome.
Yes. Or in Michael's case, you can eat as much as you can, beat the other team in this festive meal competition. The team
That sounds
eats the most
delicious.
wins the glory.
You know, if you've ever met Michael in person, you would know why this is so fitting for him, because he eats like 8 sandwiches at a time. Like most human beings make a sandwich, not Michael. There's like 8 of them.
Eats,
that he
It's
makes.
not that
one-
much, but it is a little bit. It's
like dinosaurs, he eats one big meal a day. That much I know.
I didn't think about that. He was LARPing the whole time he was eating at my place. I get it. All right.
And another team mode is you can engage in multiplayer battle mode for a team deathmatch. And that sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And there's also the capture the map, which is like capture the flag, but you capture your opponent's nests instead.
This game looks like a lot of fun, honestly. All joking aside, like this would be fun to go in there and do some battling as a dinosaur. I could also see my kids totally loving this idea, right? To go be a raptor and destroy things in there. And it looks really well done. It's an early access game, so people need to be mindful of that. You're probably going to have bugs and different things of that as they're working through it. That's the point of the early access game. But, you know, this looks like it's going to be a cool, fun game to play out there when it's released finally.
Definitely. And like Ryan was saying, make sure to report your bugs and give the developers feedback to help them improve it. And this will let the developers know the power of our awesome Linux community.
Yeah. We do the best bug
Definitely.
reports out there.
Yes.
That has been
we
confirmed
sure do.
many times. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Raptor Territory right now is 10% off at $10.79 on Steam till December 7th.
So did you enjoy the game, Jill, when you were playing?
I did. I actually honestly liked it in some ways better than Ark Survival Evolved. And that's saying
Wow.
'cause I like Ark.
Yeah.
Just because of all the different modes and that you can, you know, it also has a free roaming mode, which I really like. And it's good in single player with teams. It's just been really,
52
really fun.
players on a map. That's like Call of Duty with Raptors.
Yeah, yeah.
What's not to love here, you know?
So in the software spotlight this week, there is an open source privacy-focused messaging app that's gaining popularity in our discourse forums, and this app is called Session. When it comes to private messaging, many may turn to Signal. It's very often the one that's described, but one of the downsides of Signal is that the accounts are tied to your phone number. Now, in some cases, like with friends and family, this is totally fine. But in other cases, like on a broader scale, this can be very, very limiting in the structure of the application. So instead, you could check out Session, which uses instead of using a phone number, it uses a session ID, which is why it's called Session, along with a recovery phrase when you want to restore it on a different computer or add a new device and that sort of thing. And the infrastructure of Session is also pretty interesting. It's quite different as well in the way that it uses Tor to get your messages and to get them to your destinations. It uses the like an onion structure, and they call it the onion requests. So onion requests protect user privacy by ensuring that no single user ever knows a message's origin or destination, which I find very, very interesting. So if you want to check this application out, you will have links in the show notes.
I love that they're using some of Onion here. And I just want to give a shout out to Tor out there is looking for users to voluntarily help them with bridges. They need more bridges built out there for Tor and things. But I like the idea, too, of not being tied to my phone number in here. And one of the folks that I work with some of the videos I've been doing on my channel lately, actually in the InfoSec world, introduced me to this tool Session here as an alternative to play with. I want to mention that it is very, very early stage, so they are still working things out. Like in some of our testing, there was a situation in which the messages were delayed or those type of things, although it seemed to have gotten much better. This was over a month or so ago. They're constantly improving it. But this is something that I think is really cool to go out there and support. Frankly, any tool out there that you can get your hands on that's kind of focused on this privacy and security is really important. Also, I did a video on DuckDuckGo. They have their new app tracking tool out. And after I did the video, they actually sent me the beta key to get into this. And I mention this only because I was shocked when I turned this on, how many applications and things trackers were going. I'm talking in the hundreds were going off on my device within a few hours of having this in, that it was blocking from things like apps that I had forgotten were even pre-installed on the phone, like Google News and stuff like that. So I just say this to say all of these tools like Session and things, definitely go out there and check those out. And they're very important to the community, that we find things like this that are not in the mainstream that really help with the privacy issues that are going on with your phones and your apps. And also people who are reporters or whistleblowers or those type of things require something like this that could keep their information secure and safe. And that's why it's so important to have tools being developed like Session out there.
Absolutely.
All right. In our tip of the week this week, this is one that actually we gave to our patrons early because we needed to help Michael with something that was going on with his hardware last week. So it actually became very useful last week, and hopefully will become useful in your troubleshooting as well. So the tool that I want to talk about, or the command, is called dmidecode. And so that's dmidecode, or also as it's known as Desktop Management Interface Table Decoder out there. Now, the dmidecode may need to be installed on your system before you can use it, so it may not be automatically installed with your particular distro. However, this tool is very powerful for when users need information on their system's hardware, such as your processor, your RAM, DIMMs, BIOS detail, memory, serial numbers, those type of things. And that was the particular issue that we're working on with Michael. Is we wanted to see, is his RAM operating at the actual speeds without having to reboot and go into the BIOS and things that it was advertised for. And we were actually able to find a problem going on with the memory utilizing this. And Michael also had the advantage of running this and then getting new memory. So that's always an advantage.
Yeah, so if you're wondering, was it running at an optimal speed? No, not even close.
It was not. It was running at like DDR3 level speed. So there were some issues with the memory there. But that's why this is such a cool command. So you do a sudo and then space dmidecode and then type and then space memory. And boom, you will have information on your memory. So you could do that right now. Of course, we'll have it in the show notes to check out. And there are other flags as well that you can use with this. This is a powerful one to keep in your toolbox.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah, Ryan and Michael, every time I set up a new rig, I always run dmidecode to make sure all my system timings are correct with my RAM and speed is correct. So it's a very important tool.
Yeah, I learned the hard way that it's important to know this tool when I had no idea if he was like, hey, what was your RAM running at? It's running. I could tell you that.
Right. It didn't crash. So
that's about all I could tell you.
Yeah.
And it's very useful. And and I got some new RAM and it is also, I confirmed it with dmidecode that it is running at a more optimal speed.
Look at
and
that.
That's
awesome. So after you're done running that command, we also have some events for you to put down on your calendar. So starting at 9 a.m. Eastern on December 13th, 2021, going to 9 a.m. December 14th. So that's 24 hours if you notice there. So starting at 9 a.m. on December 13th, running till 9 a.m. on December 14th, our very own Matt from DLN Extend and GameSphere is going to do a 24-hour gaming stream for charity. So for 24 hours, Matt will be raising money for St. Jude Children's Hospital. There are also rumors that certain hosts, like from Jill may show up, Michael may show up, I may show up, Nate may show up. Random people and hosts from across the network are going to be showing up on this charity stream. And Michael for the children has committed to doing the Superman live on stream using his stool. So that alone is worth hundreds of dollars of donations.
I didn't actually commit, however.
Thank you so much, Michael, for committing for the children to do the Superman on a stool.
It is for charity, so I will consider it more willing to consider it. How about that?
Michael is so tall. Will that be possible?
We don't know. We're honestly donating just to see him crash into the floor. I don't even think you can do the Superman on a stool, but don't tell him that. We just want to see the blooper reel from it.
I got a good balance. I might just maybe it's a challenge now. Maybe I will do it just because you challenge
you. Yeah, there you go. But this is a really awesome event. Matt's going to be doing lots of gaming and things on there. So if you've never been into games and you want to learn after this podcast talking about games and Lutris and all that, and you want to get into games, you can watch Matt stream, see some of the games that he's playing out there, and you can head to our Discourse forums for more information and make sure you're there to help encourage him through this. Also, we've got Scale coming up. Scale is having its 19th annual Southern California Linux Expo taking place on March 3rd through the 6th at Pasadena, California. There's rumors Jill will be there. I don't think you'll be doing Superman, but you'll be there.
Oh yeah, every year. Honestly, Scale is really my home and my Linux family. And to me, it really is. It is the best weekend of the year, and I'm not just saying that. It truly is. It's my Linux family, the best event of the year. And if it wasn't for Scale, I wouldn't be here on Destination Linux. So it's really important to me.
Well, now we owe Scale even more.
Yeah, now it's important to us even more.
Yeah. And I run the Linux Chicks LA booth, and the last few years, Matthew has had a Lutris booth. I actually helped him a little bit get that Lutris booth. But
nice, you get a Lutris booth over there at Scale. You can see Jill as well. That's all making it worth attending by itself. There are 3 ways you can volunteer if you're interested in helping out Scale. You can attend, of course, as regular attendee and just register for it, or present. So there are still opportunities. At least last I checked, there was open still for presenters. So if you want to present there at Scale, you can as well. But the fact that Jill's going to be there makes it worth it.
That's enough reason to go right there.
I'm always there. In fact, this is my Scale hat.
Oh, you got your own hat. That is too cute, Jill. That is too cute.
Is every year at Scale, I wear this hat.
Nice. That is awesome. I love it. Well, a big thank you to each and every one of you for supporting us by watching or listening to Destination Linux. However you do it, we love your faces. We're here every Sunday, by the way, at 1 p.m. Eastern, live at dlnlive.com. The best part, everyone is invited to watch the recording of Destination Linux each and every week, and we can't wait to see you in the chat. And we also have our glorious patrons, which get perks like unedited versions of the show and get to hang out in the patron after show, which is a 60,000 square foot virtual stadium. And Michael, I have introduced some amazing technology to our patrons. Not only do they get piped in, so there's no delay. You know, on YouTube and all that other stuff, they have to wait for 15-second delay. I found a way to also pipe video to them as well, so they get to watch it without delay. I know. It's unbelievable.
Woo-hoo.
It's never been better to game on Linux. It's never been better to be a patron on Destination Linux. That's what I hear. Anyway,
I think that's a fantastic thing, and there's so many great perks. So definitely go check it out and become a patron, so you can get all of those perks and join us also in the patron post show that happens every week after the show. And if you want to support the channel and the show as well, we have things like the dlnstore.com where you can pick up some awesome swag. We have t-shirts, hoodies, mugs, stickers, backpacks, and so much cool stuff. Check it out at dlnstore.com.
And make sure to check out all the amazing shows here on the Destination Linux Network. We have the Sudo Show, This Week in Linux, the DOS Geek Channel, DLN Extend, Hardware Addicts, GameSphere, and the Fedora Podcast. And everyone head to destinationlinux.network and subscribe to all these great shows. And please don't forget to leave a rating on your favorite app so others can discover the power of open source to keep those penguins marching and the full Monty of Linux and open source awesome sauce.
Everybody have a great week, and remember that the journey itself is just as important as the destination.
Thanks, everyone.
See you next week.
Woohoo!
We did it!
Hey, woohoo!
Oh, that was heavier than I thought.
Outtake.
We need one of these hats that Jill has, Michael. In our store,
this one was
Oh, yeah.
custom made, and it looks like Tux.
We're gonna have to try to figure out
adorable.
how to get that in the store for sure.
I heard you were going as a raptor. I heard you were going to show up to Scale as a raptor.
You have to get one of the. They have those T-Rex blow up costumes. We'll have to get him a raptor one.
I've learned so many things about you on this show.
Me too. I didn't know I did that either, and it sounds fun. You know?
Yeah.